Ya Ali Madat everyone, and welcome to today's webinar entitled Courage and Compassion, Learning from Imam Ali, to be presented by Afroza Nanji. My name is Alwaez Rahim Shivji, and I will be the facilitator for this webinar, which will be approximately an hour long. And there'll be approximately 20 minutes allocated for a new TED-style presentation and 20 minutes for open conversation between Alwaeza, Afroza, and myself. Now, before we get started, I wanted to go over a few things. First, I'd like to thank you all for taking your time to be with us today, to explore, to be curious, and to be inspired. Thank you to all of the volunteers and all of the resources that have made this webinar possible. And thank you to Alwaeza for sharing her time and her knowledge with us. At this time, I would like to remind everyone about the access line that allows you to access resources and information or assistance of any type. The number for this is 1-888-536-3599. You can also visit www.iicanada.org for further information on how to contact the access line. We will share that number and website again later. Now, before we begin the presentation, I'd like to share a quick bio of Alwaeza. Alwaeza Dr. Afroza Nanji is an educational researcher and learner designer for various international development, academic, and government agencies. Presently, she works for the Global Center for Pluralism and is developing an online course for educators. Alwaeza Afroza is a member on ITREB Canada and is a graduate of the International Wazeen Training Program.
Yali Madad, good day. Thank you, Rahim, for your introduction. Today we are exploring through narrative the courage and compassion of our beloved first Imam, Imam Ali, alayhi salam. And let's start with this. A lovely piece of artwork from the Aga Khan Museum collection, 17th century India. It is, I'm sure you can tell, an image of a lion, an example of zoomorphic writing, where a calligrapher has blended the arts of writing and drawing by using words to form an animal shape. You may know that Imam Ali, alayhi salam, or peace be upon him, was known as Haider, lion, king of lions, the lion of God. Now, the image of the lion is made from calligraphy that consists of an invocation to Imam Ali, a call to Imam Ali, the Nadi Ali prayer. Call Ali, call Ali, call Ali, the manifester of wonders. You will surely find him helping you in your troubles. All grief and sorrow shall disappear by your authority. O Ali, O Ali, O Ali. This artwork reminds me of a lovely story that Jalaluddin Rumi, 13th century Persian poet and mystic, writes in his Mathnavi, an extensive poem. Rumi tells the reader to learn how to act sincerely from Ali, who is God's lion. In the poem, Rumi describes a battle during which Hazrat Ali finds himself victorious, hovering right over his enemy who is on the ground. Rumi writes that Hazrat Ali drew his sword to deal the final blow when suddenly the opponent, likely flustered and humiliated at having been defeated, spat on Ali's face. Hazrat Ali paused, calmly put down his sword and walked away. The man was puzzled, and he inquired why he had not been finished. Hazrat Ali explains that when the warrior spat on his face, he got angry. And if he were to kill the warrior now, it would not have been for the sake of this battle, but rather as a response to his anger. I was intrigued to see reference to this battle in our IIS secondary curriculum, Muslim Societies and Civilizations, Volume 1. The battle was the Battle of the Trench in 627, when Prophet Muhammad ﷺ organized the defensive digging of a deep trench. It is during this battle that Hazrat Ali walked away from a moment of victory after being insulted by his opponent. He wanted to calm himself. What Rumi explores through this story is that one real measure of courage is overcoming and being victorious over one's anger and pride. To show composure and self-control. Imam Ali, alayhi salam, in the artwork is also depicting as well an inner strength. I am sure there are many instances over the last little while that we have felt far from serene and relaxed. We've likely had moments of being anxious, on edge, scared. Many of us, after all, are facing enormous challenges, changes in our daily lives. Perhaps in these very moments is the need to try and draw on inner strength, to walk away when we can, to calm down, and many times to ask for help. Let's return to Rumi's telling of the story with the champion Ali putting his sword away when one would think it would be the time to use it. Hazrat Ali, our beloved first Imam, says that along with being aware and controlling his anger, he looked at the warrior through the glance of compassion and saw his own humanity reflected in his foe, his enemy. Hazrat Ali addresses the fallen warrior by his own name, and we read in Rumi's poem, illustrious one, I am you, and you are I, Ali. How could I cause Ali to die? Ali compassionately saw the fallen warrior as himself. Oh, how this deserves our attention and reflection. Hazrat Ali actually saw his foe as himself. He acknowledged their common origin and their rightful and shared journeys on this earth. If we see each other as ourselves, we can live compassion and look after one another. In his address at the commencement ceremony of the American University in Cairo, Egypt, on June 15, 2006, Maulana Hazrat Imam said, in his teachings, Hazrat Ali emphasized that no honor is like knowledge. And then he added that no belief is like modesty and patience. No attainment is like humility. No power is like forbearance. And no support is more reliable than consultation. Notice that the virtues endorsed by Hazrat Ali are qualities which subordinate the self and emphasize others. Modesty, patience, humility, forbearance, and consultation. I asked myself, how can I nurture this ability, this deep compassion to see someone as myself, and in fact, to subordinate myself and emphasize others? And here's where I turn back to Rumi's poem. You see, there is one last chapter in the story. As Hazrat Ali and the fallen warrior continue their dialogue, as Rumi puts it, Hazrat Ali reveals one last secret. He talks about another reason why he was unable to kill the defeated warrior. In Rumi's poetic story, Hazrat Ali tells the man, I am God's lion, not the one of passion. I am a mountain, God's my solid base. Strength of character came from faith, was based on faith, was built on faith, and this informed his actions and reactions even in the most challenging of circumstances. Thank you so much for joining me to hear this incredible story told in poetic form in Jalaluddin Rumi's Mathnavi, and to be inspired by such beautiful artwork, which is zoomorphically sharing a lovely prayer urging us to call on Imam Ali and help build calmness, compassion, and strength in faith. Before we open it up for discussion, I thought I would share a quick rendition of this story in A.J. Arbery's work, Tales from the Mathnavi, 1961 publication, in which he tells the story in such an interesting and lovely way. It's chapter 19, page 83 from this particular book, Ali and the Infidel Who Spat in His Face, an example of chivalry. And the story goes, learn from Ali true sincerity in action. Know that the Lion of God was cleansed of all imposture. In battling for the faith, he overcame a certain knight, quickly drew his sword and made haste to slay him. Thereupon that man spat in Ali's face, the face of him who was the pride of every prophet and saint. He spat on the cheek before which the face of the moon itself bows low. Forthwith Ali cast his sword aside and relaxed his vigor in fighting him. The enemy champion was amazed by this deed, by his showing forgiveness and mercy without any occasion. You lifted up your sharp sword against me, he said. Why have you not flung it aside and let me be? What did you see better than battling against me? What, that you have become so dilatory in hunting me down? What did you see that so fierce a wrath as yours subsided, that such a lightning flashed and then recoiled? What did you see that from the reflection of your vision a flame burst forth in my heart and soul? What did you see loftier than all being and space, that was better than life itself, so that you gave me life? In courage indeed, you are the Lion of the Lord. In chivalry, who can say what name to call you? In chivalry, you are like the cloud of Moses in the desert, out of which came that banquet and bread, incomparable. Ali, you are mind and I entirely. Declare a little portion of what you have seen. The blade of your clemency has split my heart. The water of your knowledge has purified my earth. Declare it. I know well that these are the mysteries of God, for it is his work to slay without a sword. He is the artificer without tools and limbs, the bestower of these profitable gifts. Declare, falcon of the heavenly heights, hunting goodly prey, what thing you saw at this time from the Creator. Your eye has learned to perceive the very unseen. Such things as the eyes of those present with God are stopped against. Since you are the gate of that city, it goes on to say, of knowledge, since you are the ray of the sun of clemency, be open, O gate, to him who seeks the gate, so that through you the lifeless husks may come to the living core. You are a community in yourself, at once 1 and 100,000. Whose way is it to give the hand to the dragon? It is for God's sake that I wield the blade, replied Ali. I am the servant of God, not the commissary of the body. I am the lion of God, not the lion of passion. My deed testifies to my religion. When thou therewest, it was not thyself that threw. God's words are true of me in the war. I am as a sunbeam cast by God, the sun. I have cleared the baggage of self, out of the way, reckoning all but God to the non-existent. I am a shadow, and my Lord is the sun. I am the chamberlain, I am not the curtain forbidding him. My inclination is only stirred, it goes on to say, by his wind. The captain of chivalry is only the love of the one. And then towards the end of this particular version of the story, the sword of clemency, of mercy, compassion. The sword of clemency is sharper than the sword of steel. Nay, it wins more victorious than 100 hosts.
Thank you, Alwaeza. That was a fantastic presentation. Would you be okay if we had a little bit of a conversation about some of the topics that came up over that presentation and what you spoke about?
Absolutely, Rahim. I'd enjoy that. Thank you.
Thank you, Alwaeza. But the first question I really have is, what inspired you to look at this story? What thing about this specific story really brought this forward to you?
Oh, I appreciate that question. I didn't think I'd be asked that question. It's such a personal reflection for me. Thank you for that. Two reasons, I would say. Two reasons come to mind. The first is Dad told me this story growing up. I heard it several times and different versions of it. And that is really, it's stayed with me always. And I have his book now, Tales from the Mathnavi. And when I saw the story in there, you know, it just came to life for me because I had never read it. I'd only heard it from him. So that is one personal reason. But the other is, for me, this story speaks to the idea of choice, that moment of choice. And I think that moment is so small and so minute, but yet so big. It's such an opportunity to choose how you're going to react to a challenge. And I've been thinking about that. And it, you know, especially, you know, with our context. And I think always there's moments of choice. And so those are a couple of reasons, Rahim, that it's a meaningful story for me.
And I personally learned a lot about Rumi from your father as well. So thank you for bringing that up. But in terms of moments, you actually spoke about moments of choice. And that brings to mind some of the things that we've been told by our Imam about these moments that you can take, moments of zikr as well. Those are moments of choice as well.
How nice.
Yeah.
Agreed. Yes. Moments that it takes a second or a moment. It doesn't even have to be known to others.
Mm-hmm.
right? Where we can remember.
Yeah, and I think those are also things that Rumi alludes to as well within some of his poetry, where we have choices to choose to remember God, choose to think about things, choose to actually reflect before we act. And I think that that's this the key for me when I was hearing that story is that it was a reaction. It was just like a split second, and Imam Ali reacted in that moment in the most ethical way that an individual, I feel, could react. And it's amazing that it was an ethical reaction. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And this, based on faith, which ties back to what you know brought us to at the idea of remembrance. Remembrance of what, right?
Mm,
That remembrance and that practice is based on something. And I think that then one informs the other and one strengthens the other,
yeah,
which is, I think, where the opportunity or the potential lies.
yeah. And we even see that in the title of one of my favorite works on Imam Ali, Justice and Remembrance. Like
Yeah.
it's
Yes.
interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, as a part of my training when I became a dentist, we actually learned about um, competence, and it was an interesting lecture that we once had about conscious competence and unconscious competence, and that's what this reaction brings to mind. It's being so adept at doing something that you unconsciously will automatically do the right thing, which I feel can come through with zikr as well. So, what are your
Mhm.
thoughts on that?
I find that fascinating because I think, on the one hand, there's this notion of a human being having that ability to reflect, to choose, to discern, and to base one's actions, be
Yes.
it actions, words, on that ability, which raises us, right? Which raises us, our status in creation, because we have that ability. When I think of intellect, I think it's that piece also, that ability to reflect and decipher and choose then. So on one hand is that, and on the other is that eventually it becomes second nature, which is what you're speaking about. So how do we get there where it's second nature, but yet based on that reflection, right? So, and I think that's where maybe this idea of practice, of the faith comes in, because it allows you to then be that way.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, but I wonder if what do you think about this? Can you ever be completely that way? Or is this an ongoing journey, right? Of
Yeah,
choice and mistake and reflection and
yeah,
hopefully, because, right? What do
yeah.
you think?
I don't think it can end. I don't think there is an end point because there's always going to be somewhere to grow towards, and
Yeah,
I think that's part of the whole beauty of life, right?
yeah,
The fact that it ends when Allah has it end, but there's no end for us. We just keep working, we keep growing, and it's a blessing.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, it is. It
Yeah.
is.
And another question that came up within the context of your story is this concept of forgiveness, right? Imam Ali was able to forgive this adversary who was right in front of him, who actually acted in a way that was very, very aggressive and very, very negative. It must have made him feel quite bad. But how many of us will be able to do that? How do we grow forgiveness within our hearts? So, what would you think on that?
Well, I think when I think of forgiveness, mercy, compassion, it's I really appreciated what Rumi writes in what Imam Ali said, that you are Ali, you are me. So to
Mhm,
see the other person as oneself,
mhm,
and what would we want for ourselves, for our families, for our immediate surroundings, all of that is what we would want for someone else, just as we want to be forgiven and shown mercy. you know I think that thinking, so to see the other who may be very different than oneself as oneself.
Mhm.
And that, I think, is such humility, right? Such submission and such an acknowledgement of our common origin and looking beyond the physical to that. So what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that's
I love what you said about, I am you, because there's a Ghinan reference,
yes,
which says Ali Ali Karna, right? And I've always found that interesting because Karna can mean to say, but it also can mean to do, to be, to work towards, aspiring towards being.
yeah,
And I've always found that to be very interesting because it talks about remembrance, and that's how I've always interpreted it. But it also talks about action. And we see that with our Imam and how our Imam works in the world and what our Imam does. It's not just about preaching from a pulpit. It's not just about talking about things you can do. It's about concrete action. It's about ways to spend your wealth. It's about ways to grow communities. And it's a very diverse approach as well. I mean, how many NGOs really invest in creating parks, creating museums, right?
right.
That's important. Those are important aspects of development. Hotels are important aspects of development. As I personally found out when I went to Tajikistan to do volunteer work, and I needed to stay somewhere, and it was a fantastic place to stay. The Serena hotels are actually some place that I would like to bring my family to stay. So I
And
find that it's action.
it's action and action based on, I mean, if we look at Prophet Muhammad's, peace be upon him, his hadith, none of you will have faith until he wishes for himself what he wishes, wishes for his brother what he wishes for himself. And so it comes with that, but then the action piece is you put it into practice. Agreed. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where we speak for people who don't have a voice, and where we and sometimes that involves some, I've been thinking about the idea of anger, because here I think anger was controlled, there was calmness. But do you need some anger to speak, about the situation we find ourselves in, and the
Mm-hmm.
people who are being, constantly, do not experience justice for years and years to come, and for years and years, and it seems for years and years to come. But what kind of anger does that require, and how do you have that, passion,
Mm-hmm.
uh, but it's used for positive, right?
Yeah.
Used for positive purpose.
Yeah, and it's also important not to discount emotions, right? Like
Right.
anger, Allah gave us anger for a
Yeah.
reason. Allah has given us
Interesting.
sadness for a reason.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's this concept of emotional quotient where we think about our emotions, we let ourselves experience them, and we grow with what we're experiencing, not by suppressing it. It's not about just being happy all the time. We can't be happy all the time. That's
Right.
not healthy and that's not good.
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
it's important to have those negative emotions
Yeah.
as well.
Acknowledge them.
Yeah,
Yes.
and even in this context, Imam Ali was on a battlefield, right?
Right.
It's not like he wasn't walking in a park, right? And someone
Right.
spit at him. It was a battlefield. You expect negative things to happen there.
Yes.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah. You'd also spoken. I really enjoyed at the end of your presentation. You spoke about we spoke about building on faith, such as Imam Ali, when it says he built his life, his actions, even his reactions from this base of God, from this base of faith. Um, and this brings to mind Maulana Hazimam's recent quote about building and building well. What are your thoughts on this building and how it relates 1400 years, or maybe if you look at this the time of Rumi versus now?
Right. I mean, when I think of the word build, I think of a progressive type of notion, right? That you build something to then have that which you've built serve you,
Mhm.
right? And so when Hazrimam, for me, when Hazrimam says build well, it's a thoughtful, knowledge kind of based, action based, inclusive approach to building something that will then serve the community and broader society. So that even in challenge and constraint, there's opportunity, right? And so here, when I think of the word, built on faith, or the basis was faith, that was what was drawn upon, right? That is what provided that ability to be calm and to show compassion. It's not removed from faith. It's very much integrally connected to it. And so to separate, that's why I think when we say, din and dunya are connected, because they inform each other, right? And the din is infiltrated in the dunya, be it through ethics, be it through how we respond, to others. It's so integral. But anyway, the thought around, that's what comes to mind when I think of build. What came to your mind when that this was built on faith?
Yeah, so I was thinking similarly with ethical bases. Like Maulana Hazrat Imam actually spoke at the Sirat conference, where he said the life of the Prophet gives us every example that we need, right? And that's made me think about what was the life of the Prophet. And the life of the Prophet was integrally tied to the life of Maulana Ali, right? They were inseparable. And I find that there was a lot of ethical messages that go beyond the specific legal guidances that we got at the time of the Prophet. There was a lot of real thought that went into why things were the way that they were. And it's essentially building upon this ethical base with more levels of ethics almost, right? And that's how I see it. You mentioned in your presentation as well, we see the self within the other. We mentioned it earlier in our talk as well. That, to me, is this ethic of pluralism, right? And we see the Imam building this global center for pluralism. We see a great focus on pluralism. And the Imam has been speaking about this for so many years. And Maulana Ali spoke about this. Prophet Muhammad spoke about this. They all spoke about these concepts of pluralism in their own different ways.
Yes, yeah.
And even to today, we have divisiveness in our societies because these concepts behind pluralism are not really being followed. We have diverse societies. We've always had them, and we will always have them. But the acceptance, the love of the other, and even within our community, sometimes we need to work on these types of things, where we need to work towards being better at loving, at giving this love to other human beings.
Yes, and I think for me, that is very important and profound what you're saying. And I think practically it also requires an acknowledgement of our historical narratives and our diverse historical narratives and how they have informed certain very different worldviews. When we say pluralism is about seeing or a component or a part of pluralism is seeing the self in others, it's also acknowledging that one's worldview is shaped by the historical narratives that they've learned about and the dominant worldview they've resided in, and they do things a certain way and say things a certain way, think a certain way because of that. I think as soon as we remember that, there's a certain willingness to learn from someone who's different than oneself. The other piece for me, Rahim, that was really, I thought about is Hazrat Imam's excerpt from his speech, where he talks about Imam Ali's qualities and this notion of consultation.
Yes.
Right? And when I think of consultation, I think of dialogue. And I think that that's a very critical ingredient in pluralism, is we need to have dialogue, even difficult dialogue, about difficult topics. And that dialogue allows one to see oneself too, because as soon as you encounter someone and can have the dialogue, you learn about them, but you learn about yourself too. And then hopefully you also see that there's a shared common humanity, but that shouldn't dilute the notion of difference, and that we can be very different based on our different worldviews and experiences. And that I have as much to learn from someone as I can share, right? And that's, for me, the notion of consultation. What did you think of from that quote, like these words of forbearance and consultation? And
Yeah, that was fantastic. It's one of my favorite quotes. Right away, the very, very first thing that came to my mind was this thought of the AKDA and the work of consultation with communities.
yes,
But
yes,
something else that came up with this idea of consultation and dialogue was actually this concept that's embedded in Nadi Ali, because it's a call, it's a discussion, right? And that really ties into your presentation as well, because there was that lion, and it was in the shape of the prayer Nadi Ali, which is such a powerful prayer.
yes. And that call on him, like it, that idea of it's a dialogical, right?
Yeah.
You're right. It's a relationship.
Yeah.
It's relational, I think, with our creator and with each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this call is to get help at times of difficulties in our lives, which always come up. Like, especially we have a world filled with COVID. There's so many things going on everywhere. Every day there's something else that's new, and we're all watching the news cycle more closely because many of us were stuck at home for so long, and we're noticing things more that were always out there, but they're becoming more apparent now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's important to remember God. It's important to reach out to him. Many people I've spoken to say that I don't want to only call to God when I'm feeling bad. I want to also talk to him when I'm feeling good. But it's important to start somewhere. It's important to do it when you're bad, because Allah wants that. Allah wants us to reach out to him when we are sad, when we need the help.
Yeah. And it can be a very personal conversation that one can have, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the beauty of it, is what's you can write your own letter to God in your heart at any time, right? It's such a blessing that we can do that, invoke his name.
Yeah. My son, before he goes to sleep every night, just talks about his day. It's a part of his prayers. He says his zikr, and then he says, today I did this, today I did this.
Oh, nice. So nice.
Yeah, it's quite amusing. And, in the future, I hope we continue to do this, because it reminds me of Socrates, a life not reflected upon is not having worth lived. So he thinks about his day, and he says how he beat me in board games, or what video games he won. I don't know.
That is wonderful. That is something, hopefully, that he'll always do. I don't see my teenagers doing that, but maybe I just don't hear it now, right? Who knows, right? But ultimately, it's that practice, that it doesn't have to be a formal. It can be an informal type of conversation or relationship. Really love that. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
If this is on the internet in the future, he'll look so embarrassed. But we looked at the story, we looked at the image, we looked at some of the imagery behind this. What is courage here? Like, how does courage reflect itself within not only the story, but also how does it reflect itself in how we view the mirror of ourselves in the other, as you spoke about so eloquently earlier?
For me, I think what was moving about this narrative is the idea that courage, bravery, usually we think of strength, right? When you're courageous, you're strong. And the lion, is the strongest, most courageous of animals. And yet this wasn't about physical strength. In fact, it was not at all about that physical strength we have heard and read that Imam Ali had. It was an inner strength, an inner courage. Yes, based on faith, but that which probably, I think, is so much more meaningful than physical strength. And so, how to be courageous, to build that courage in ourselves, in our children, in those that we interact with. And that's what, for me, was the beauty of this, is that it doesn't matter how strong I am physically, but that this was about an inner courage, the courage to choose wisely, the courage to, right? And that takes courage. It's so hard sometimes to subordinate the self or to show forgiveness. We have so much that raises us, right? Our accomplishments, the ability to know, to acquire knowledge, the ability to care for creation. It raises us, but I think it also gives us the sense of entitlement sometimes, many times. We're also encouraged to compete, right? You know, in a society that's very meritocratic. And how do you balance that with this notion of humility and subordination and inner courage to choose? So difficult. But yeah, I really appreciate that term of being courageous, especially now. Some of us are taking leaps in our professional life, right? In family life. And it requires that courage. And sometimes we may not feel very courageous, and that's okay too. I mean, it's something we aim for.
Yeah. Yeah, and well, my children are in the Talim books, and we're reading about the case of the animals versus the humans from
Yes.
Ikhwan. Yeah, and in it, like I'm giving away the ending, sorry, but in it, at the end, essentially, human beings are held higher, but that's because we have specific standards we have to meet. That's because we have to be a certain level. It's not just because we were created with a bigger brain, bigger cerebrum than other animals. It's not about that. It's not because we're stronger. It's not because we're braver. It's because we use these things in a specific ethical manner.
Yeah.
Right? That's your point right there, right? It's about
it's the choice.
Yeah, the choice.
And the responsibility to use that, which raises us.
Yes.
Such a lovely story, isn't it? The trial of, because look at all that we do. We should be on trial. We can't, sometimes, many times, we can't get along. The issues of the environment and climate change and, so yes, but yet they won the trial, human beings.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. They did win the trial, even though all the evidence seemed to be against them. At the end, there was one critical piece, and that's that responsibility. That's who we are accountable to.
Yeah. Lovely.
You'd spoken as well. I think your quote from the story was, "I'm God's lion, not the one of passion." And that's what you were just speaking about as well, right? Not that one of passion. The metaphor of the lion can really be expanded out from here as well, right? You hinted at that earlier, because lion is, hey, there is not just that attacking animal, not just that courageous beast, right? But also the courage to win the trial, the courage to grow, the courage to ask for help. Nadia.
Yes. And the passion is not the passion of anger, which can be destructive anger. Maybe we need anger, but it should be constructive anger. It doesn't hurt others. It allows for growth and building, right? And so but not the passion of uncontrolled anger. That Imam Ali actually walked away first. You have that, right? The scene of him walking away to calm himself, because we have that in us too, as you mentioned. And so that passion to me is a passion and a commitment and all of those great things that passion brings with it. But it's not the passion of destructive anger, which can break instead of build, I think. Yeah.
And it's like something that we learned about is torsional fatigue, because you can bend something, and if you bend it enough in the same way, eventually it breaks. But as long as you're careful with how things are being moved, as long as you're careful with how things are being bent, they don't break.
Look what you just said, Rahim. You said careful, having care, showing care. That ability to show care, right, comes from that ability to be aware. I think that's what we have, is the ability to be aware. Yeah, and mindful. Such a great discussion. I so enjoyed this. I wish we could keep going.
Thank you very much for your time today. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, for sharing there's a quote that what we've learned, what we've achieved is because we stood on the backs of giants. And I think you and I have had the privilege of standing on the backs of so many giants in the past. So I'd like to say thank you to all those giants from the past as well.
Yes.
And thank you to you for sharing everything that you have with us as well.
Thank you, Alwaez Rahim. Really enjoyed this conversation.
Finally, we ask that our audience takes the time to fill out the survey that is available on the link below. If you are joining us via YouTube, please click on the survey link in the description tab below the video, which will route you back to the II Canada page for this webinar, where you can then click on Share Your Feedback found under the title. Finally, I'd like to remind everyone about the access line that allows you to access resources, information, or assistance of any type. The number for this is 1-888-536-3599. You can also visit iicanada.org for further information on how to contact the access line. Thank you for sharing your time with us today. Ya Ali Madad.